Good evening, everyone. I hope you're doing well and that your family is safe. Glad we've been able to worship the last couple of weeks. We still have a lot of people that aren't able to come back. We know that we've got some still challenges ahead of us. Apparently our state's getting worse, at least according to what we're told. And so we want to be safe. So those of you that aren't able to attend worship on Sunday and are doing it online, know that those of us who are able to go to the building, we miss you and we look forward to seeing you again real soon. We hope that this class is beneficial to you and helping you. And we're going to pick right up where we left off last week. Now last week we went back to, since we know we're going to be doing this for a while longer, we've gone back to talking about God's plan for redemption, and we discussed some attributes about God. You know, if we're going to follow God, if we're going to live according to Him, we want to know as much about Him as possible. And of course, that really is a lifelong process of knowing about God and having a growing relationship with God. But we looked at several different things. We talked about His omniscience, His omnipotence, His omnipresence, and we looked at His goodness. We looked at the fact that He is eternal and self-existent, and that's going to come up a little bit in what we're talking about today. But we finished last week with the idea, or not the idea, but with the statement that God is the creator of all things. We looked at Isaiah 45:12. We mentioned Exodus 20:11, where Moses writes that in 6 days the Lord created the heavens, the earth, the sea, and all that in them is. And so that's where we want to pick up this week. What I'd like to do this week is discuss creation. And then as we move through the creation and we get to sort of the crowning achievement in creation, that is the creation of man. We'll move there next week, Lord willing, and we will talk about man and the law that God, or the rules God had put in place. We'll discuss the fall of man, and of course, in order to have a plan of redemption, there had to be those who fell because they needed to be redeemed. And so, not that, I got to be careful how I say that. Not that, what's the best way for me to put this here? God didn't make them fall. The rules were laid out for them, and when they fell, God's plan for redemption, of course, began. Now, He had this plan from eternity. And as we discuss the idea of a plan of redemption and the need for man to be redeemed, that is, brought back into a good relationship with God, mentioned in the first class that we had at the building before all of our quarantine, the idea that we don't want to go further than, let's not try, I think it was Milligan that said, let's not attempt to be wise above what is written. Okay, so I recognize when I made that statement that maybe I would have introduced some thoughts that may be challenged to us. And not that we shouldn't be challenged, but we want to stick with what's written, because what's written is what we have, and it's what God's given us to reveal Himself to us. And by the way, what is that called when God wrote to reveal Himself to us? Special revelation. Very good. And what is it when He shows Himself in nature? General revelation. Very good. I don't know why it is, but when I turn on the camera and the microphone, I lose my voice. Quite amusing, actually. And I sound like a dainty flower. Okay. So God, we left off with God being the creator of all things. So open your Bibles to Genesis chapter 1 and verse 1. We're going to take a look at this verse and a few things about it and talk about it before we move on to man next week. So in Genesis chapter 1 and verse 1, it says, "In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth." This is a short verse, isn't it? What we got there, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 words that are huge. And whether you believe this verse or not is going to determine how you view the Bible. It's going to determine how you view life. It's going to determine how you live your life. And so one verse, its scope is, it's interesting because it's simply making a statement, isn't it? We would say it's declarative, not demonstrative. That is, that God simply declares He made the heavens and the earth. He's not trying to prove that He exists. He's not trying to demonstrate anything at all. He simply says He created the heavens and the earth. This is, as one writer put it, it's affirmative, not argumentative. And so He simply says it. He affirms it. It's not argumentative. He doesn't have to go back and forth. He's not going to go back and forth with whether or not you believe He's God or not. It's historical. This is a statement of history. This is the beginning of history as far as the earth is concerned and the heavens and the earth are concerned. It's not philosophical in nature. This is a historical statement. There's no attempt here to prove the being of God. Again, as one person put it, He's the unprovable fact upon which everything else is built. And that doesn't mean that we can't prove that He exists, but the statement here is simply this: God made the heavens and the earth. Not offering any arguments, not offering any a demonstration. God made it. Period. Dot. End of discussion. And as the psalmist would say, when you get to Psalm 14, only the fool would say that there is no God. And so here we see the self-existent, the uncreated God. He is seen creating, and it is a fascinating study and discussion. Now, we're not going to go into the study of evidence as we did that a couple of years ago. We may do it again from time to time. That's not the purpose for this. We're looking specifically, trying to focus the thrust of our discussion in this class toward the plan of redemption. But when we look here at God creating the heavens and the earth, this simple statement here really denies several false teachings that are in the world today, right? And so this is important. If you have stumbled across this on YouTube, and this is your first confrontation with the Bible, facing of the Bible, do some thinking about this. How you view about this verse, or feel about this verse, or view this verse, really determines everything else for you concerning your life, how you're going to live, who you're going to serve. Because if indeed God, if there's a God, and He exists, and He made heavens and the earth, and as we'll read down through this creative act that we see here in chapters 1 and 2, if He created me, then I have a responsibility to Him, or He's going to expect something from me if He made me, and I need to know what that is. So investigate this and think about it. We are approaching this class from the fact that we believe without hesitation whatsoever that this verse is true. Okay? We believe the Bible is His Word. It's true without hesitation. Now, this doesn't mean we're going in blind. We don't believe in what the world calls a blind faith. Hebrews chapter 11 says that, at least if you're going to look at biblical faith says that it's the faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. So we're not going into this blind. We don't read this statement and then just say, okay, because that verse says it, we automatically accept it. God doesn't mind you putting him to the test, as long as you're honest about it, right? And so there's plenty of evidence to show that God exists. In Romans chapter 1, a verse we've discussed in previous classes, we see that in nature we can see that there had to be a designer. We can look at the vastness of the universe and see that there's a designer. We know the Bible teaches, Hebrews chapter 3 and verse 4, that every house is built by some man, right? But he who built all things is God. The argument being this: we don't look at a house and think that all the materials and design of that feature just happened. We look at that and know somebody had to build it, right? It's simple logic. And so we look at the design of the universe. We look at the design of nature. We look at the design of the human body, the complexity of the human body alone. And we have to look at that and say, someone had to make that. It just didn't happen. Okay? And so we believe, without hesitation, Genesis 1:1 is absolutely true. And we proceed from this point with that belief. So, this being the case, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. We see that this stands in direct opposition and teaches against several false doctrines that would be taught, false teachings in our world today that are accepted. Number one, it denies the eternity of matter. The evolutionists is in a position where they feel like they need a lot of time to make their theory. They call it a fact. It's not even really a hypothesis, barely. But they want a lot of time. They think time will fix it. And but the fact of the matter is, and so they say that matter is eternal. But even those who would say that matter is eternal recognize that there are laws in place, like the laws of thermodynamics, right, that say things are running down, so they had to have a beginning. They just haven't existed for eternity. But if we're going from this statement, which we are, it says in the beginning. The beginning is an easy word to understand, right? A child can understand it. If I say begin, they know it's a starting time. They know they start something. We read here, in the beginning, there was a commencement. The heavens and the earth had a beginning. They started. Now, the age of the universe is a challenging one for those who work in fields of geology, those who accept an evolutionary timetable. For the Christian, however, we understand that this earth is relatively young, with the appearance of being old. We understand that when he made things, as we look through this creative act a little bit later, he made them mature. When Adam and Eve were created, they weren't infants. They, guessing probably that we're looking at adults who were in their mid-30s, early 30s. I don't know the age, but they were created fully mature, okay? And so 2 minutes after Adam was created, he looked older than he really was just a couple of minutes. God created everything maturely. We don't have a problem answering the question, what came first, the chicken or the egg? The chicken came first, period. Everything was created maturely. And so there was a time that things did not exist. Don't even like to use the word time. There was eternity. Then God spoke into existence the heavens and the earth. Time began. This is the beginning of time. This is the beginning of history for mankind. And so this verse denies the eternity of matter. This verse also denies atheism. The atheist simply says this: there is no God. But the Bible starts by declaring He is. He exists. Geology, astronomy may try to maintain that there was hundreds of millions of years for the existence of the universe. Again, we deny that. But even at that, they can't answer the question, when did it start? Who started it? It's why they have to go to the doctrine of eternal matter. And this teaches this. And so God started it. He is eternal. Remember, as we looked at last week, one of the phrases that we looked at, where Moses is told to go back into Egypt, and when they ask who he is or who sent him, God tells him, tell them the I am sent you. Now we know this phrase I am means self-existent one. We also see I am translated as Jehovah. Jehovah means I am means self-existent one. And so nobody created God. He is the self-existent creator. All atheism does is create a lot of problems, but they don't solve any. And so God is. And one reason that atheism exists is because if God is, then even the atheist recognizes that there would be a responsibility to listen, to hear, to be obedient to this creator. But because most don't want to be subject to somebody else or have to live by somebody else's rules or law, they simply deny he exists, and they go off on what they call is freedom and live their life the way they want to, making themselves their own standard. They argue a moral standard. There is no such one, and no atheist can prove it. And so they make their own standard. This verse denies atheism. This verse also denies what's known as polytheism. Polytheism. Now, polytheism, poly meaning many, theism meaning God, so we have many gods. If the creation were the work of many gods, then the unity of the universe, we're going to have to be able to account for how it all works together if different gods did their thing, right? This verse doesn't say that. It says in the beginning, God created. Now, interestingly enough, the word here for God, and I'll tell you this, and I am not a Hebrew scholar in any way, shape, or form. But from my studies, this word is a plural. It's the word Elohim. You may have heard it before. And so in this point of being not many gods, but this being plural, we want to try to figure out and understand, because we believe the Bible to be true, and the Bible teaches that there is only one God, Deuteronomy chapter 6 and verse 4. We want to understand how this can be plural and there not be a polytheistic teaching, that is, many different gods. So as we go throughout this chapter, actually from chapter 1 verse 1 down through chapter 2 and verse 3, you'll find that this phrase, this word God, Elohim, plural, is used 35 different times, and in the Old Testament over 2,700 different times. And so what we come to learn later on as we unfold the rest of Scripture, and God does this, He places facts and details all throughout the Scripture. And so we don't just take one teaching or one thing out of its context and make a doctrine. We want to gather the whole body of information. This is called the inductive method of study. We want to gather all the information, and then we can logically understand how that information works together to come to a conclusion. And so we get down to verse 26, and we find that God said, "Let us make man in our image." And so here he is obviously speaking to somebody else, and man has not been created yet. He's not speaking to the animals. Some argue that it could be angels, but the language doesn't really allow for that, because he didn't make man in the image of angels, right? He said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness." And so man is made in the likeness of God. And verse 27 lets us know, in the image of God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them, which we'll talk about in the lesson in the future. And so we understand then that this would deny the fact that there are many different gods. There is one God, Deuteronomy 6:4, and that one God, as we go throughout the remainder of Scripture, we find that there are three distinct beings in God, in the Godhead. And you can see that in several passages throughout the Bible. Go back to last week's lesson and you can take a look at those things. And so this denies the fact that there are many gods. This verse also denies what is known as pantheism. What is pantheism, and why would we even bring it up today? It doesn't sound like anything that would affect us at all today. Well, don't make that mistake. It very much affects us today, and there are a lot of people who believe some form of pantheism in this as well. Pantheism teaches this, that God and nature are the same. They're one and the same. When we hear people make reference to Mother Nature, understand that they're capitalizing that, and while for the most part people today don't think anything of it, we use it as really as an idiom to talk about the weather. Okay, so we don't need to beat someone over the head if they use the phrase. But as Christians, we need to be aware of the fact that we're not going to say Mother Nature, because really Mother Nature is an affront to the God who created nature. Okay, it's if you really look at it, it's reference to a title of a being of deity, and that's a mistake. Don't make that mistake. Okay, God created. Again, I don't want to go too far with this, because in our society it has become known as used as an idiom to just simply say the weather's really bad. Mother Nature's kicking up tonight, and look at what's going on. As Christians, though, let's be aware of that. Let's don't use that language. We don't want to promote that type of thing. But pantheism teaches that God and nature are the same. Now I'm going to pause it right now because I'm going by my timer and it's about to kick off. We'll come back, we'll finish this up and talk about a few other things. Okay, so in pantheism, this verse denies pantheism, as we mentioned. And pantheism, again, it teaches that God and nature are the same. And so it fails to distinguish between mind and matter. It fails to distinguish between right and wrong. What happens is those who want to hold this idea of a pantheistic world, we say God's in everything, right? I got this desk here that I made, this tabletop made out of poplar, and I formed it, I shaped it, I created it. The pantheist would say God is in that wood. Now, I would say God designed it, but this wood is not God. And so it allows people to take somewhat of the same attitude and path toward life that the atheist would have. And that is that there really is no moral standard. If God is the tree, right, I'm going to treat the tree however I see fit. Some want to hug them and say that they're God. Others want to cut them down and make furniture out of them. Neither one would be wrong, right? But I can't look to that tree and see that there's a moral standard. I can't look to the material universe and determine what right and wrong is. But here's how we answer it from here. It would say, the pantheist says God and nature are the same. But just think about the logic in the verse. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And yet God is the self-existent one, isn't he? He's the uncreated creator. And so, since he didn't create himself, then the heavens and the earth cannot be the same as God. You get me? And so, this verse denies pantheism. It also denies agnosticism. Agnosticism is somewhat of a little brother to atheism as far as I'm concerned. And I've mentioned this to you before. When you look at some of these words, like you look at the word atheist, in the Greek language, an A in front of a word negates that word. And so if you have someone who is a theist, they believe in a deity or God. If you're an atheist, it negates it and you don't believe that there is a God. Agnosticism, the word Gnosticism is a word that encompasses the idea of knowledge. Agnosticism is that you can't really know, okay? And so they would say you can't really know if there's a God or not. To me, they're almost trying to please both sides here, but the agnostic says you can't really know if there's a God or not. And so that's where they stake their claim. But here's the thing. The universe is an effect. We've already determined it's not material, so it's an effect, right? It had to have a cause. It had to have, the building had to have an architect. Like we talked about Hebrews chapter 3 and verse 4. We can look, to me this is common sense. I get somewhat frustrated with those that want to complicate it. And they would say, well, that's your simplicity and you don't want to investigate anything deeper. Not true at all. I've investigated it deeper, and the simple is the answer, and that is this: that I can look at anything. I've got a phone right here, that I do things on that phone that are incredible. I've got a son that lives in Israel, a daughter who lives in Texas, and I move money between banks across the ocean from this chair on that phone. I pull up a picture and I can see someone else talking to me in this city, in another country in the world. I have friends in Africa. I talk to them on that device. That device sends a signal up to a tower, and that tower goes up to a satellite, and that satellite from space shoots across all the way over, comes down, hits a tower in Africa, and goes to a friend's phone, and I can talk to them and see them. And would you ever remotely even say, well, you can't know if somebody made that. You can't know if somebody designed that. Come on. I mean, it's just raw materials. You can't know anyone made it. Really? I mean, come on. You don't have to have a PhD to be, you have to have a PhD to be that dumb, to think that it's not there, apparently, because some are educated beyond their own intelligence. But the fact of the matter is for most people, we would, without hesitation, say, I look at the house across the street out this window, it's a nice house. Somebody designed it. Somebody built it, right? And so the universe being so much more complex, right? So much more complex. You can look at it and know. Again, because we believe the Bible to come from God, we look at Romans chapter 1 and God says people are without excuse because He has revealed to us through nature the fact that He exists. Now, we don't know anything about Him from nature. We can just know that He's there. That's the beginning, right? We need to know He's there. And then I've got a responsibility to figure out He didn't leave us hanging. We believe the Bible came from Him, and it's provable that it came from Him. And so that's a discussion for another time. Nevertheless, this verse really denies and shoots a complete hole in the idea of the teaching of agnosticism, that you can't know. You can know. It also denies what we would term as fatalism. You know, reason is against fate and chance. And that is this. This universe, it couldn't just happen. We have those today that have advocated for a long time what we call the Big Bang Theory. Again, in the scientific world, I was always taught it went from hypothesis to theory to fact, and each of those things had to be testable and provable to a certain degree before you could move on to the next step. The idea that this just happened isn't even really out of a hypothesis stage, and yet the world says it's a fact. Interestingly enough, the scientific community can't even get their act together because some of them speak of the fact of the Big Bang, and part of the rest of the scientific community have abandoned that, realizing the problems with it. And the problem, of course, is that matter isn't eternal, and something had to start these things, right? Something had to begin these things, even if you are one who believes in the false, and I want to clarify, the false teaching of theistic evolution. You know, all these, well, I'm getting off topic. Let me go here. This just doesn't happen. Matter isn't eternal. We don't believe in chance. God has acted in the freedom of His eternal being and according to His infinite mind, and He willed this earth into existence ex nihilo, out of nothing is what it means. And so this is important to us, okay? This is important to us for this reason. We don't believe that the earth happened by chance. And since it didn't happen by chance and God created that, that is very important to me because of the rest of the Bible is predicated on whether or not I'm going to believe that this verse is true, right? If this verse is true and God made this earth and He did it for a reason, I need to know what that is. I want to know what it is. It has profound importance in relation to the rest of the Bible. Very, very important. Now, it's interesting to me as we think about in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. There are those who would say, I mentioned theistic evolution a minute ago as I was starting to get sidetracked, and I believe that it is an utterly false teaching, and that I don't believe that a faithful Christian can believe in theistic evolution and be okay with the Lord. You can deal with that matter on your own. I want you to consider this, though. In the beginning, God created. And so when we look at this word created, all right, this speaks of a decisive act. This isn't something that allows for God taking a long time to do things. He spoke it into existence. There are some Hebrew words. Again, I'm not a Hebrew scholar. different words are used here that you can look up. We have words like bara and Asa and Yatzar, I believe is how it's said. Again, I don't know Hebrew very well. I just looked at this particular aspect of it to study it. The idea that God created, the idea of evolution, it can't be found in this word used for created, and God uses it more than once here. He uses it in verse 1, but he also uses it in verse 21, he uses it in verse 27, and so we don't, evolution, or this word created doesn't allow for a pre-Adamic race. It doesn't allow for what evolutionists would look upon as, coming out of this single-cell organism to develop itself into man through that long process. The word created does not allow for that to be true, and so it's important to understand that he created. He did it in the beginning. There was nothing, then there was something, and he made these things. Now, something I think that's also interesting, we move these doctrines to the side, and that this verse really clearly combats. The interest of the Bible, and this is something that I think is especially important for us today. The interest of the Bible is not in the universe as a whole. We don't find in this creative work, God creates the heavens and the earth, and then we see that he forms planets and stars and things like that. We don't see him go from this creative act to begin talking about the rest of the universe. We don't see him talking about people or beings who live elsewhere. That's not the purpose of the book. And it's a reason that I flatly deny that we have other inhabited planets, that we have, quote, UFOs that have more intelligent, I don't know why they're always more intelligent than we are, but we tend to want to think that, more intelligent beings elsewhere. It's amazing to me that we will quickly gravitate to believe in intelligent beings that would come from another planet, but we wouldn't dare give thought to the fact that there's an intelligent creator that created this one. Don't you find that a little bit odd? I do. But as long as we think that the others are intelligent, but we haven't contacted them, then I guess it's the idea that we wouldn't be accountable to anyone more intelligent than us. But God is the creator. And the interest of the Bible is in the universe as a whole. What is the interest of the Bible, and where do all the events of this book really unfold for us and highlight for us? It focuses on this earth. This earth, which was determined by God to be the home of mankind. And actually, not only the home of mankind, but as we go through this class, which we know we're talking about God's plan for redemption, the earth is going to be the scene, the stage for that plan to unfold. It doesn't happen anywhere else. There's not his one and only son that lands on different planets elsewhere. His one and only son comes to this planet to die for the human race and to redeem the human race. And so it's interesting as well that we move straight from a creative act, right, to the crowning part of creation. Above all the fascinating universe, everything that's involved there, with everything that takes place upon the earth, the story quickly goes to the crowning achievement, and that is man. And so he creates man and woman, and then the focus goes to man and woman. And the story deals with, for the remainder of the time, what happens on this earth, but it's to humans, it's to us, it's to humankind. And so we have this thought passing swiftly from the creation to the universe to the consideration of one little planet in the vast majority and glory of all the cosmos, down to focusing in upon humanity. And that's really what the Bible is concerned about, right? And so he created the heavens and the earth and made mankind upon it. And the object of the record here also isn't to give a scientific account of his work. Now, there's a lot of science here. And for those who are way smarter than me, the science that they can unpack is tremendous. But this is given here. Really, it's a rapid review process, right? I mean, here's the beginning of it. Here's the day and night were started. Heaven and earth were created. Land and sea, vegetables, light, life in the sea and in the air, creation of life on the earth, and then the crowning achievement in making mankind. And then God completes his work and he rests. And then the story's moving on. So it's not meant to be scientific. This is a story. The Bible is a story about God's relationship with man and how he wants man to be with him. And so this earth is the sphere, the only place where the probation of man and the redemption of man, which we'll discuss later on, is going to take place. And the emphasis in the chapter, I like one fellow said it this way. When you look at the chapter, what's emphasized is God saw, God said, and God did. And having seen, said, and did, he finished his work and he rested. And so, really fascinating that God wants this relationship with us. But just this one verse alone defines so much for us and determines how we're going to live and how we're going to believe. Now, we're going to stop here for this week. We'll move on next week. I want to talk a little bit more about creation for just a few minutes, because I want to point out the idea of what's known as Hebrew parallelism. It's a common way that was used to write things, to get pictures across in the Old Testament. I want to talk about that a little bit next week. And then we're going to talk about the creation of man, the institution of marriage, if time allows. And we'll begin to continue to move forward in our need for this idea of redemption. At this point, we're not there yet, right? We just dealt with the beginning. And so I hope this is helpful to you. I hope you can study the material over the course of the next week. If you have any comments, feel free to get on the church website, which is listed at the end of this video at sunvalleychurchofchrist.org, and send in your questions or comments. I'll do the best I can to answer them. Honestly, I don't have much time, so if it's a deep one, I'll try to cover it during the class instead of writing you back individually. I hope this has been helpful to you. I hope the rest of your week goes well. For those that are able to come to worship on Sunday, I really look forward to seeing you then. For those that are not, we miss you a great deal. We're praying for you. I want to ask and solicit your prayers on behalf of the elders once again. They're doing their best. And that's all that anyone can ask. It's all the Lord asks of us. We certainly don't want to try to put more on them than what the Lord does. So they're doing their best, and we'll continue to follow their wisdom and guidance as we go forward with the pandemic that tends to be raging in our country and throughout the world right now. I love you, and I hope you have a great week. We'll talk to you later.